Take, O Lord, and receive our entire liberty, our memory, our understanding, and our whole will. All that we are, all that we have, thou hast given us, and we give it back again to thee to be disposed of according to thy good pleasure. Give us only thy love and thy grace, for with thee are we rich enough, nor do we ask for aught besides. Amen. Good morning. That prayer, as my father would say, gets me in the pencils. My father used to say that at all family meals, large meals, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter especially. And when he died in August, a mere 37 years ago, I tried so hard to recall it. It was pre-internet age, so I couldn't just Google some of the words. And of course, he had changed some of them anyway to be a little bit more Anglican. But I dearly loved this, and it was kind of like something I could hold on to right after he died. So we're entering into August, and I'm thinking of him. I also saw a parallel between the gospel and this prayer. And the irony, to go full circle, is that when I did find it on the internet, it is attributed to St. Ignatius. It turns out his celebration, his feast day, is today. And that was kind of eye-opening to me. And as Susan mentioned, this isn't an accident. It's just the way things happen when you go to church. I said my father died a mere 37 years ago. I think you understand that's not hyperbole. When you have gone through something like this, it is living with you day to day. It's as if I could put myself right back to the day he died and remember, the need for this prayer. The prayer, like the gospel, it reminds me of the rich man called by Jesus. He's sort of called out. He's feeling fulfilled in life. He has wealth. He has status. A lot of what we're called to, or feel called to, as we grow and work our lives here in New Jersey today. Barns filled by self-reliance. The setup for this was Jesus was called to settle an estate. Divide the estate between my brother and me. This is one of those moments for Jesus that I feel must have been really exasperating. I've been here so long, and I've said so many things, and this is what it's reduced to. I've got to settle division of money. So he tells the parable, and at the end is that twist at the end where, he's got the barns, he's got the new barns filled full, and yet God comes to him that very night and says, I demand of you your soul, your life. It's just ironic also that this prayer and the gospel parallel my feeling at my father's death, because I was left with that wrenching feeling as if you've been kicked in the stomach and empty. Here was, and just thinking on pragmatic level, here was a very talented, promising musician, composer, author. He had taught me, I was talking about musicians and who's really a musician. He said a musician is someone who on the third verse can switch keys without looking at the hymnal, not to mention any names. But it is a gift, and one far beyond my mere attempts to punch out a tune on the piano. I know many in this room have felt a tragic loss, and the immediate question is, why? Why? It makes no sense. Like the story of the rich man, my barns of the time were rendered empty immediately. Spiritually kicked, devoid of the security I felt, scared, confused, empty. Perhaps this is what the gospel is telling us. If we are fulfilled in life, there's no room for God. If we're fulfilled, we've taken it on to have a full life to our own credit. We must empty ourselves, rather, and not be weighed down or held hostage by this self-reliance that we have. And thus be open to be filled full when God does enter into our lives. Now let me tell you about the prayer. St. Ignatius wrote this prayer that my father had found. He was a Basque noble, a knight. He fought in battles and wars and was severely wounded one time and went to Loyola to recover. That's where we get his name, St. Ignatius of Loyola, not to be confused with the other Ignatius. He had there a revelation. During his recovery, he was called to God. He was called to poverty, to chastity, quote, to seek out God in all things. Now this, to me, is to seek God out in all things. It's to see above the pettiness of our own world, our own reliance. Now the readings really dovetail today. The three readings call for the futility, the vanity of life, your life work. And I felt when you look at all three, and I would include in that the psalm, it's almost as if this week is one of those pendulums that's swinging back not only to the faithful, not the new Christians, but the ones who have been with us as Christians for a while, who need a little straightening out, but also less supportive. It's more a reprimand. Said, you know how the pendulum swings. Last week, Father Jacob, very supportive and lifting, and now it's going to push down. Congratulations for next week, it's coming back to the other half. The psalm says, we can never ransom ourselves or deliver, I'm on verse 6, to God the price of our life. For the ransom of our life is so great that we should never have enough to pay for it. We cannot ransom ourselves, but Christ can. And Christ has. Now, as a warning to the new Christians, the Old Testament says vanities or futility. It's all futility. Whose will your wealth be when you're gone? It is just frustrating to think. You work so hard your whole life just to get by, and then what is that? To me, it was the antithesis of the Garden of Eden, where everything was provided. We could have faith that everything was there, all we needed, but afterwards we're on our own, providing for ourselves as best we can. In the New Testament lesson under Paul's letter to the Galatians, he reminds you, if you have been raised in Christ, seek things that are above, not earthly. Seek things that are above. Seek renewal. Don't be drawn down. Set your hearts on that. Put your eyes above. Let the earthly be. Trust. I have two examples I want to give of where we're called to go. One is to think higher, and the other is taking a spiritual leap. Excuse me. As we enter into August, I'm reminded that school bells are about to ring, and the 7th and 8th grade, newly formed, will be joining me, and I begin again to try to make them think, maybe at a higher level, and not on a Christian way or a spiritual level, just intellectually. How do you go from what I call the simplistic to the sublime? Now that may be something you understand, but 7th and 8th graders aren't quite there. So often I begin with the idea of a light switch. What could be simpler? A light switch, and every classroom has one. And we talk about the light switch, and then I say, okay, is that simple enough? And then ask them to tell me about it, and I hear stories of not just on and off, but there's electricity, leads to light. And then I got a smart aleck in the back row that says, yes, it's binary, it's on and off. It's like the electrical mechanism for memory in computers. And I said, okay, now we're going. And then a cautious hand in the front row said, well, also there's kind of like the symbolism of light as intelligence and darkness as ignorance. And I said, okay, let's go on. And we start to develop similes, and with the 8th graders, eventually metaphors, and what I call wisdom in your back pocket. I said, keep this wisdom, or this potential wisdom, in your back pocket in case you ever need it going forward. Many of them have no idea what I'm talking about, but I think you understand. To think higher. We need to lift our eyes today and seek the highest level. Acknowledge God. All that I have, all that I am, thou hast given me. My other story is about a parish somewhere near Cranberry, New Jersey, who 4 to 5 years ago, before I was here, had made a leap of faith to build a barn. It wasn't exactly a barn, they called it a parish hall. And I can only imagine, and I have heard stories of the leap of faith, not only by the leadership, the clergy, but the whole parish. There were so many unknowns, there were no guarantees. And boy, it was clear it was going to be expensive. What was it that allowed that parish to make that leap? And yet, you did. Today we have Mears Hall. It is not filled as a museum to St. David's. I see no relics of the past there. It is open every week. We have jazzercise there, we have AA meetings, we have nested churches using it, parties. And something that St. David's does very well is the community gathering at coffee hour, which is so powerful. Yes, it has been filled, full, because we weren't fulfilled. And we give it back to thee, to be disposed of according to thy good pleasure. For in thee are we rich enough, nor do we ask for aught besides. Amen.